Okay, hello, and thank you for attending our presentation. This presentation is about the role of evidence registries in child welfare. We will be presenting a comparative analysis of 3 different registries: the Title 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse, the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare, and the Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development. My name is Sue Kearns. I will be facilitating the discussion today. I am also the PI for the Title 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse. I'm pleased to introduce the panelists. First, we have Sandra Wilson. She's the Project Director of the Prevention Services Clearinghouse. Jennifer Rolls-Roots, the Director of the CEBC. And Pam Buckley is the co-PI of the Blueprints Registry. Today, we will briefly review each of the registries and then engage in a compare and contrast discussion across all 3 registries. We hope you'll find this to be an engaging format. To start, we would like to acknowledge our funders. The Prevention Services Clearinghouse is supported by the Administration for Children and Families, Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The CEBC is funded by the California Department of Social Services, Office of Child Abuse Prevention, and Blueprints is currently funded by Arnold Ventures. Evidence registries have several important roles. First, they synthesize the evidentiary status of specific programs or practices. This can be very useful because there is substantial variability with regard to the quality of studies for different programs and services. When many programs or services are reviewed, registries can provide a synthesis of an entire literature base for particular programs. For example, there could be many different interventions for anxiety disorders, and registries help sort out which of those interventions are effective. Most evidence registries are available to the public, and this is particularly beneficial because it can be difficult for community members who are not directly affiliated with universities to gain access to all of the research specific to a particular program. Further, the ability of registries to systematically review evidence using clear standards provides the public with specific support for understanding the evidentiary status of programs and services. Finally, in some cases, registries can be developed to respond to funding or policy requirements. Okay. So now we're going to hear directly from each of the 3 child welfare relevant registries. I'm going to turn things over to Sandra Wilson first to describe the Title 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening in today. We're glad to have you. I'm Sandra Wilson. I'm the Project Director for the Title 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse, the newest registry of the 3 being discussed today. The Clearinghouse was developed to be an objective and transparent source of research and evaluation on programs and services intended to support children and families and prevent foster care placements. The objectives of the Prevention Services Clearinghouse are to conduct an ongoing, transparent, comprehensive, and systematic evidence review of studies on candidate programs and services, to synthesize and disseminate the results of the ongoing evidence reviews, and to establish and maintain an interactive and searchable website. The Clearinghouse conducts our independent systematic reviews in accordance with the Family First Prevention Services Act of 2018. We're recording this webinar on December 18th, 2020, and as of today, the Clearinghouse has reviewed 47 programs and services and over 300 studies of those programs. 27 have been rated as promising, supported, or well supported. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how does the Prevention Services Clearinghouse relate to the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act? The Clearinghouse reviews and reports on the evidence to support the Act, which authorize new funding for states to implement evidence-based programs, evidence-based prevention programs. State agencies may include programs and services rated as promising, supported, or well supported by the Clearinghouse in their state Title IV-E prevention plans. This part of the FFPSA is administered by the Children's Bureau within the Administration for Children and Families. And this investment by the federal government in evidence-based prevention programs is intended to increase the use of evidence-based programs and services, prevent foster care placements, and ultimately to improve the well-being of children and families. Next slide, thank you. To identify effective prevention programs and services, the Clearinghouse uses a systematic review process. This infographic on the screen provides a high-level overview of the steps that we follow to rate programs and services for the Clearinghouse. All programs go through the same process, and each step in the process is carefully documented by our staff. We use this systematic review process in order to remain objective about the programs we review and to be transparent about all aspects of our work. On the next few slides, I'll give you a very high-level overview of the standards and procedures used to conduct our reviews. You can find much more detail about these standards and procedures in the handbook, which is available on our website. In accordance with the FFPSA, the Clearinghouse reviews research in 4 broad program areas: mental health prevention and treatment, substance use prevention and treatment, in-home parent skill-based, and kinship navigator. For the mental health, substance use, and in-home parent skill-based program areas, there are 4 outcome domains, and 3 additional outcome domains are included for kinship navigator programs related to service access, referral, and satisfaction. In accordance with the Act, every eligible study is reviewed against our rigorous design and execution standards. These standards focus on internal or causal validity, that is, whether the study design and procedures used to conduct the study produce credible evidence about the causal impact of the intervention on the outcomes. There are 3 possible study ratings: high, moderate, and low. Randomized designs, including cluster randomized designs and quasi-experimental group designs, are eligible for review. However, only randomized designs with low attrition can achieve the highest rating because these designs produce the most credible evidence. Once all the eligible studies that support the evidence base for a program or service are assessed against the design and execution standards, the program or service receives a rating by the Clearinghouse. In accordance with the legislation, programs and services can receive one of 4 designations: well-supported, supported, promising, or does not currently meet criteria. Programs and services that receive the well-supported designation are those that have at least 2 studies with non-overlapping samples, where both studies were delivered in usual care settings and both studies had high or moderate ratings on the design and execution standards. There must be favorable effects found for at least 1 target outcome in each of those 2 studies. And at least one of the studies must show that there is a sustained favorable effect lasting at least 12 months beyond the end of treatment. Programs or services that receive a supported designation have at least 1 study that is rated high or moderate. That also needs to be carried out in a usual care setting and demonstrates sustained favorable effects for at least 6 months beyond the end of treatment on a target outcome. Those programs or services that receive a promising designation must have at least 1 study that has high or moderate ratings on design and execution and has a favorable effect on at least 1 target outcome. As laid out in the legislation, a program or service cannot be rated as well supported, supported, or promising if there's sufficient evidence of risk of harm, such that the overall weight of evidence does not support the benefits of that practice. Programs that receive the does not currently meet criteria rating are those for which there were no studies of the program that received moderate or high ratings, or there were studies with moderate or high ratings, but they did not exhibit any statistically significant favorable effects on a target outcome. Also, if there's sufficient risk of harm, a program or service may be deemed does not currently meet criteria by the clearinghouse. All right. So as of December 18th, 2020, the programs you see on the slide have been evaluated for well-supported, supported, promising ratings. And as you can see from the list, programs cover all of our program areas. And when we review programs, we aim to select programs that represent a range of service intensities, age ranges, delivery approaches, and so on. So that covers my review of the clearinghouse. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jennifer now, who will tell you about the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. So the CEBC, or California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare, was started in 2005 through funding from the California Office of Child Abuse Prevention, and has been supported by them for the past 15 years. Our goal is to increase the use of effective research-supported practices in the child welfare system. And when we started in 2005, the term evidence-based practice was still very new in the child welfare field. So a lot of our initial work was spent educating about the term and also about why the child welfare field should be interested in research and focus on outcomes. So one clarification, while our name has both California and child welfare in the title, our website is freely accessible to everyone. The website address is listed here. And we also have many programs that, while very relevant to children and families involved in child welfare, can be also used by a much broader population. We've reviewed about 1,000 programs on the website to date, of which a little over 500 are currently listed. And the other programs, the other 500, did not meet our basic criteria for review, which I'll cover in just a minute. Okay, next slide. The CEBC rates programs in a variety of topic areas. We're currently adding about 2 to 3 new topic areas each year, in addition to adding new programs to existing topic areas. Topic areas are selected by our advisory committee, which is made up of child welfare administrators and stakeholders. As you can see, there's definite overlap with the 4 program areas that are covered by PSC that Sandra just reviewed, but we also cover additional topic areas, and we have about 50 topic areas on the website currently. We're currently in the process of adding 2 new topic areas, one on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder interventions, and another on developmental and autism spectrum disorder interventions. And in the coming year, we'll be working on multi-problem approaches and place-based interventions. About 250 programs have been rated on the scale, while almost the same number are listed as not able to be rated. All right, so going over our review process. As you can see from the slide before, the CEBC is topic area driven. So after the topic area is selected by the advisory committee panel, CEBC staff conduct a literature search to begin identifying programs, and also to identify a topic area expert who is an outside consultant who will provide support for the development of the topic area and also the selection and rating of programs. We try to identify about 15 programs per topic area to add to the website. Sometimes it's hard to find that many, depending on the topic area. And in other topic areas, there's a lot more options, and we have to narrow down the list quite a bit. We use a standardized screening process to determine whether each potential program meets our basic criteria to be added to the website. In general, each program has to have either a written manual available, or they have to offer training or consultation on how to deliver the program. There also has to be a clear contact for the program, either a person or an agency. So basically, it's someone that you can reach out to who can support you if you have questions or concerns during program implementation. We want to make sure that each program we review can actually be adopted and delivered effectively. There's really no point in telling you about a program that you can't actually implement well. So once we determine that a program is eligible, we work with the program to fill out the CEBC questionnaire, and CEBC staff do a more detailed literature search looking for all published peer-reviewed studies. Each program is then rated independently by 3 raters, and the ratings are reconciled. Okay, next slide. Thanks. The CEBC has 5 rating levels. with 1 being the highest and 5 being the lowest. And I'll just cover the main requirements here. You can see more details on the CEBC's website. So level 1 is called well supported by research evidence. It requires at least 2 randomized controlled trials that showed effect in topic area related outcomes. At least one of these RCTs also had to show sustained effect 12 months or more after the end of the intervention. And finally, the research had to be reported in a peer-reviewed publication. I should comment that we also look for preponderance of the evidence on the CEBC. So it's not enough to show a single effect. If you have multiple effects or multiple outcomes that were not effective, we actually look at where the majority of the evidence was located. Level 2 is supported by research evidence, and this requires 1 RCT and at least 6 months of post-intervention sustained effect. And then level 3, promising research, requires at least 1 study using some form of control that shows the program is beneficial. Levels 4 and 5 are programs that we obviously would not recommend, as they either had 2 or more RCTs that showed the program did not have significant effects on the topic area outcomes, or that the practice was actually harmful. And the harmful effect, the negative effect and risk of harm can be shown either in studies or through legal empirical evidence. Basically, we'll do a wide review to look at see if there's any risk of harm. Finally, we have a category that we call NR, or not able to be rated. This means that the program either doesn't have any published peer-reviewed research, or it didn't meet any of the rating levels that we just covered. So for an example, a program might publish a pre-post pilot study that examines the impact of the program. But if the study didn't use a control or comparison group, we would not be able to use it to rate the program, and the program would end up listed on the website as NR. I want to also note that we rate each program based on the topic area outcomes. Programs can be rated in more than 1 topic area and can have different ratings in each topic area depending on their research. So for an example, an intervention that addresses both trauma and substance abuse could end up rated as a 1 for trauma treatment and a 3 for substance abuse treatment if the research support for each topic is different. All of the ratings by topic area are posted at the top of each program's page on the CEBC. And I think now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Pam Buckley, who'll tell you about Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to each of my colleagues. 2 things I want to say before I start. Number 1, thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to be here, and we are really excited that you are interested in this topic, one thing that we really care about. And second of all, I'm excited to be here with the PEBC, or the CEBC and the PSC, sorry for all the acronyms. And as I go through my piece, I'm going to be brief in that you'll see a lot of similarities between the 3 registries. So I'll try not to reinvent or duplicate what's been mentioned. Launched in 1996, the mission of Blueprints is to provide a comprehensive registry of scientifically proven and scalable interventions that prevent or reduce the likelihood of antisocial behavior and promote a healthy course of youth development and adult maturity. As of November 2020, Blueprints has reviewed 1,557 programs and services, and 95 or 6% have been certified. Our website address is indicated on this slide. Also included on our website is a FAQ page to get more detail on the registry and a list of all publications we have produced. This slide also indicates the 3 social media platforms we maintain: Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And questions about Blueprints can be directed to us at blueprints@colorado.edu as indicated on our website. Next slide, please. Let's see. So originally started as Blueprints for Violence Prevention. In terms of our history, we were one of the earliest efforts to establish a clear scientific standard for evaluating the evidence of a program's effectiveness, implementing a rigorous expert review process, and certifying those programs that met this standard. Blueprints is currently the longest standing registry in the United States. Next slide, please. Blueprints has 4 standards. The first standard or criterion, which we call intervention specificity, focuses on the theoretical basis and logic model for the intervention. An intervention's guiding theory or theories, targeted risk and protective factors and outcomes, populations to be served, and specific content and methods of delivery must all be clearly identified. This standard serves as what we call like a screener, meaning that the interventions that do not meet this criterion are ineligible for further review. The second criterion is called evaluation quality, in which the evaluation trials produce valid and reliable findings. The third criterion is intervention impact, in which the preponderance of evidence from the high quality evaluations indicates a significant positive change in intended outcomes that can be attributed to the intervention, and there is no evidence of harmful effects. And our fourth criterion is labeled dissemination readiness, which means the intervention is currently available for dissemination and has the necessary support required for implementation with fidelity in communities and public service systems. Next slide, please. We too have 3 main evidence categories as indicated in the green boxes. So Blueprints has 3 certified ratings, and we have, like I said, these green boxes identifies them. We also have these seals that we use to identify the different levels of our ratings. The Blueprints registry standard for a promising rating requires 1 high-quality randomized controlled trial, or RCT, and 2 well-conducted quasi-experimental designs. I should say one or the other. A model rating requires a high-quality RCT and sustainability of effects for at least 1 year post-intervention. Blueprints also has a Model Plus rating, which requires at least 1 well-conducted RCT led by an evaluation team that is independent of the developer. If a well-evaluated intervention meets 3 of our 4 criteria but does not have the organizational capacity for users to implement the intervention with fidelity, it will be listed as not dissemination ready. This rating designation is listed in the non-certified yellow box on this slide. Additional non-certified ratings include ineffective, harmful, inconclusive, and insufficient. Again, these are listed in the yellow box on your screen. Next slide, please. For our review process, the schematic on your slide your slide provides a summary of the process for determining Blueprint certification. First, Blueprint selects interventions to review through searches of the evaluation literature, blogs, the internet, and other registries. We also review interventions with requests from developers. Second, a program review begins with an internal evaluation by Blueprint's staff. Interventions that meet requirements for strong methods and positive evidence undergo a second review by the Blueprints Advisory Board, made up of a distinguished panel of methodological experts with a variety of expertise. For those interventions approved by the board, Blueprint staff gather information on readiness of the intervention for dissemination to users. The registry is actively managed by Blueprint staff and represents one of the most comprehensive program registries in the world. And now I'm going to turn this over to Sue to lead us in our discussion.
Great, thank you. It is such a pleasure to get to hear all the details about each of these different registries. And so at this point in the presentation, we're going to just kind of switch gears and start really unpacking the similarities and differences across each of these different registries. So as we go through the next series of slides, each slide will be on a different topic area. We have sort of an overview of the information that was just presented with each of the registries side by side, and then we'll engage in a brief discussion about some of the kind of interesting aspects of the differences and similarities between the registries. So for this first topic area, it's the types of programs reviewed. The types of programs reviewed by the 3 registries do overlap some, but there are differences as well. As was mentioned by our panelists, the Prevention Services Clearinghouse reviews both prevention and intervention-focused programs and services. Studies reviewed do not necessarily have to involve child welfare, involve children, youth, or families, however. The CEBC is focused on services that would be appropriate for children and families involved in the child welfare system, as well as professionals working in the area. And Blueprints, though originally focused on delinquency and crime prevention, is now has a much broader focus, looking at positive youth development. So my question for the panelists is, how do you determine if a program or service is eligible to be reviewed by your clearinghouse? Let's hear first from Sandra.
Thanks, Sue. And I'm sure you all have seen my furry assistant on the screen, so fair warning anyway. So to be eligible for review for the Prevention Services Clearinghouse, programs must fit into one of the 4 program areas I mentioned earlier: mental health prevention and treatment, substance use prevention and treatment, in-home parent skill-based, and kinship navigator programs. They must also have a manual, written protocol, or other documentation that describes how to implement or administer the program. Now, when there are multiple variants of a program available, each with a different manual, the clearinghouse treats them as separate programs and would conduct separate systematic reviews of the evidence on each of the variants. And depending on the resources we have available at any given time and federal priorities, we may select one variant to review when there are multiple ones, or we may select more than one on a particular round.
Great. How about you, Jennifer? What about the CEBC?
The CEBC's eligibility is actually pretty similar to what Sandra just described for the PSC. Basic criteria required: there has to be a manual or training or consultation available for each model. And there also has to be that clear contact with the program that I mentioned earlier. One other requirement, it obviously has to fit into one of the topic areas and meet the topic area rating criteria. So each topic area has quite specific criteria. They're listed on the website, so you can see what's required to be listed in that topic area, rated, etc. And we also review a wide variety of programs, both intervention and prevention, like PSC does. But we also go into things like workforce development, secondary traumatic stress, support programs for children and youth. So there's a wide range of things that could possibly meet criteria to be added to the CBC.
Okay. And Pam, how about for Blueprints?
When Blueprints was first developed, the focus was on delinquency and crime prevention, though this focus has expanded over time. There are 2 main criteria we look for when identifying an intervention for Blueprints review. Number 1, a focus on prevention, and number 2, an intervention that impacts youth behavioral outcomes. One thing that distinguishes Blueprints from PSC and CEBC is that we do not currently review interventions specifically intended as treatment for diagnosed or clinical level mental health problems. Our focus is on prevention programs and services.
Okay, great. So next, let's talk about the similarities and differences in the documentation of standards and procedures. Each of your 3 registries is guided by a review process that determines how the evidence is reviewed, but each registry approaches the review process a little bit differently. So my question to the 3 of you is that most registries do some sort of assessment of the quality of the underlying research that they review. But there are a lot of different ways to define and assess study quality. How did your clearinghouse determine its particular standards and procedures? Sandra, we can start with you again with the PSC.
Okay, thanks. So as we mentioned earlier, the Prevention Services Clearinghouse is developed out of the Family First Prevention Services Act of 2018. And it is that legislation that guided the development of our design and execution standards. Our review process was also informed by public comments submitted in response to a Federal Register notice that was put out by Health and Human Services around the time that the act was signed. We also refer to the review processes developed and used by other prominent evidence clearinghouses, including Institute of Education Sciences What Works Clearinghouse, the Administration for Children and Families Home Visiting, Evidence of Effectiveness Review, and the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse.
Oh, that's a good segue to Jennifer then. How about you?
Yeah. So the CEBC rating criteria, again, were developed back in 2005. They were originally based on criteria from a 2004 Department of Justice Office of Office of Victims of Crime report on child physical and sexual abuse treatment guidelines. So we pulled from that report and we established our scientific advisory panel, and they worked over in 2005 to tailor the criteria to fit the child welfare system more broadly. We also refined the rating scale further as we rated the first 2 topic areas and about 30 programs in 2006. And that was when we added the sustained effect requirement for the top levels. Actually, we did that shortly before the website actually went live. We have made a few minor changes over the years to the rating scale and tried to make it more transparent. We do review the rating scale every year with our scientific advisory panel and discuss whether any modifications are needed, especially to address new statistical methods that have come about in the past 15 years. We did actually, in response to the PSC documentation that's available on their website, we decided to develop a public version of the CEBC's Rating Policy and Procedures Manual, and that was recently loaded on our website as well. I do want to note that the CEBC does rely on a peer review standard. We do have some basic minimal criteria though, even for peer-reviewed publications, namely with regard to randomization, whether there's any evidence the randomization was broken or altered, and then we also require that all the measures that are used for the outcomes be reliable and valid.
Great. Pam, I'm particularly curious about blueprints with regards to this question, since you all have been around for so long and really have spanned the evolution of evidence-based practices as a whole. So I'm curious how you've established your standards.
Well, thanks, Sue. And I do want to reiterate a point made by Jennifer, how the science is evolving. We're getting better and better as a field in terms of what standards we should be using to evaluate interventions. So this is an ongoing iterative process that involves being very current in the methods literature. But going back to how we started, to guide social science researchers in the methodological criteria for establishing efficacy, or the extent to which an intervention does more good than harm when delivered under ideal conditions, and effectiveness in which an intervention effects were delivered in real world conditions, 2 seminal academic papers on the methodological standards of evidence were developed by prevention scientists and endorsed by the Society of Prevention Research. With a goal of increasing consistency in reviews of prevention research, these standards originated in a paper authored by Flay and colleagues and published in 2005, and then updated again by Gottfredson and colleagues in 2015 as the prevention science field progressed in the number and quality of preventive interventions for reducing youth problem behaviors. It's these 2 academic papers, both of which were written by several members of the Blueprints Advisory Board, that Blueprints evaluation quality standards, which are detailed on our website, were derived and adopted.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm enjoying watching the cat watch our presentation. Okay. The next one that we have are thinking about how programs are selected and prioritized for review. I'm wondering, so the folks that are watching the presentation can see some of the details on the slides here. We'll just jump straight to the question. What procedures do you follow for decision-making related to what and when programs are reviewed? So Sandra, do you want to get us going on that one?
Sure. So the first step in our process is to identify the programs and services that we review. And we use several sources for that to ensure that the programs we review are relevant to our users. And that includes public calls for nominations, recommendations from our federal partners like the Children's Bureau. And we get lots of recommendations through these sources, and only some of the programs and services identified during a public call will be selected and prioritized for review at any given time. But particular consideration is given to recommendations from state or local government administrators, as well as tribes. We also give consideration to programs rated by other clearinghouses, programs recommended by our federal partners, and programs that are evaluated as part of any grants supported by the Children's Bureau.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, how about the CEBC?
Sure. So there are two main ways that new programs get added to the CEBC. First, we have an open submission period each year where anyone can nominate a program to be reviewed, or programs can nominate themselves to be added to any of the existing topic areas. So all year long, we compile a list of requested programs that we get on our website or via email. And then during open submission, we also reach out to those programs and invite them to participate. Participation in open submission is completely voluntary. But the second way that programs get added to the CEBC, and how the majority of programs get added, is as new topic areas are added each year. So when CEBC staff identify a new topic area, they do a literature search to find programs that meet the topic area requirements. And also our topic experts make recommendations about up-and-coming programs or programs that are widely used in the field but may not actually have much research. You know, as I described earlier, we do reach out to the programs to ask them to participate in the CEBC's review process. But if a program doesn't want to participate or isn't willing to fill out the questionnaire, we still review and rate them, but we list them as what's called a non-responding program, which with a shorter outline, and we use information that was pulled from public sources.
Interesting. Okay, Pam, how about Blueprints?
Well, here again, some similarities, but some differences. As I mentioned earlier, our focus is on prevention, so that's one of the first criteria we look at. But Blueprints begins our review process by conducting a systematic search of studies, not programs, as mentioned earlier. And these studies report to impact youth program behavioral outcomes. Examples that we look for include problem behavior, educational skills and attainment, emotional well-being, physical health, and a category we call positive relationships that fits in with many of the outcomes reviewed by PSC and CEBC. Blueprint selects interventions to review through searches of the evaluation literature, blogs, the internet, and other registries. We also review interventions with requests from developers, and we have a portion of our website dedicated to, it's called Nominate an Intervention, that details the process of how to request a review of an intervention.
Great, thank you. So moving on to our next topic area, study eligibility criteria. All three of our evidence registries have pre-specified eligibility criteria for the studies that they review. But how do you put these criteria into practice? My question is, how do you promote consistency across your eligibility criteria? So we'll start with the Prevention Services Clearinghouse and work our way across.
Great. So our study eligibility criteria are documented in the handbook, and having clear criteria for eligibility is designed to promote consistency in our reviews. But that doesn't mean it's always straightforward to determine if a given study meets all of our eligibility criteria. At least 2 screeners look at every title and abstract during initial screening. And then at least 2 screeners use the full text of the study documents to determine the official eligibility of a study. We make use of content experts for many of our decisions. We bring in outside consultants when needed to help establish eligibility. And we also query authors when we cannot determine from study documents whether a study meets all of our eligibility criteria.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Sure. Very similar to the PSC. We screen all of our articles that are identified during the lit search to see if these basic criteria are met. And then if needed, we work with the study authors and also our CEBC scientific director to address any concerns. We also use consultants, statisticians, and methodologists as needed to review articles and give us feedback. I think our main difference is that we only review peer-reviewed materials. So we don't use unpublished or non-peer reviewed reports, even if they are publicly available.
Great. And Pam?
So our standards and review process is listed on our website, and each of the individuals involved in our review process, including their background and their content expertise, is also listed and available on our website. Generally, we work in dyads during the internal review stage. And then as a staff, we meet weekly to answer questions pertaining to the methods being reviewed. After the internal review, the studies deemed high quality are then passed on to our advisory board, and they work in dyads as well to provide a second review of all studies. And in addition to working in these dyads, the advisory board meets a minimum of 2 times a year in person, and where all 9 members then discuss and review the methods that are presented within the article. And it's the advisory board that makes the final decision about whether the article shows scientific evidence that meets our evaluation quality standards.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. We're going to turn now to thinking about the types of outcomes that are covered by the different registries. And you can see on this slide that there's quite a bit of variability in this particular area as it relates to the different registries. So my question for the panel is, how did you come up with your target outcomes and how have they changed over time? Sandra?
Okay. To answer the second part of that question first, we're relatively new with the Prevention Services Clearinghouse. So our domains have not changed over time. And the broad outcome domains that constitute our universe of eligible target outcomes were laid out in the legislation behind the Prevention Services Clearinghouse. And we relied on the child welfare literature, as well as experts in child welfare, mental health, and substance use prevention and treatment to help us define and operationalize what we mean by the subdomains underneath each of our domains that were specified in the legislation.
Lots of details there to work out, I'm sure. Okay, Jennifer, how about you?
So the CEBC, as we mentioned earlier, is topic area driven, and the targeted outcomes vary for each topic area. We do try to be very clear on the website about what outcomes need to be demonstrated in each topic area. The criteria are set by CEBC staff and the consultant expert who's brought on for each topic area. And since many child welfare related interventions are family focused, we also specify in the topic area whether the outcomes must be child specific, such as changes in child behavior, or whether they have to be parent specific, changes in parenting, or whether they can be both. Some topic areas also have outcomes that are more specific to child welfare, things such as placement stability or maltreatment reports. The main way that target outcomes have changed over time since we started in 2005 is actually that we try to make them much more explicit on the website and also to provide examples of what sorts of outcomes meet the topic area requirements. Again, trying to make it more transparent and clear to the website users.
Great. Pam?
In 1996, when Blueprints launched, we were funded by the Office of Juvenile and Justice Delinquency with a focus on delinquency and drug abuse prevention programs for youth. In 2011, we received funding from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and our focus expanded to include positive youth development outcomes. And in 2016, Arnold Ventures became our funder and expanded our focus once again to include programs and practices, as well as to review interventions that reduce crime among adult offenders and to rate and list non-certified interventions on our website.
Okay. Next slide. There we go. Well, as we've been discussing, this is all very time consuming. There's lots of details to be hashed out, even to the point that you identify the program and start reviewing it. But this slide is about the review process itself. We know that it's quite time consuming across all three registries. You have clear procedures, multiple layers of quality control to ensure that the reviews are accurate and follow a consistent process. So my question for the panelists is, how long does it take to review a study or program? And what do you do if a program developer or other researcher thinks that your review might be wrong? Sandra?
Thanks. So like most evidence clearinghouses, our goal at the Prevention Services Clearinghouse is to review and rate as many programs as possible with the available resources. But it's equally important to us to be thorough and accurate in our reviews. So our reviewers receive extensive training and ongoing supervision. Most of our reviewers are What Works Clearinghouse certified reviewers as well. And one of the most time-consuming aspects of our review is when we need to query study authors for more information so that we can accurately complete our reviews. In terms of the re-review process, we have a standard process for requesting re-reviews, and that's described in the handbook. You can also check out the FAQ page on the Prevention Services Clearinghouse website. That's got more information about both our review process as well as the re-review process.
Great, thank you. Jennifer?
So as Sandra was saying, there is definitely, takes time to do the review process and do it well. And the time that it takes to review a program on the CEBC can vary widely, depending on the number of studies it has that have to be summarized and reviewed, the complexity of the program itself, and how well it fits into the CEBC outline, and the amount of back and forth discussion and editing that's required between the CEBC and the program itself. We do have an appeals process so that if the program does not agree with their rating, they can appeal the rating back to the CEBC scientific director. And if needed, it can go to the scientific panel for further review. Appeals can take a while because we typically have to have several internal meetings and may need to consult with outside experts, convene the panel, which is a large group of individuals, so it can take some time to get that going. And while we do review rating concerns that are submitted by the general public, so if they have questions about the rating for a particular program, we don't really have a standardized process for that. We just review those internally. We do have a biannual review process where every program is asked to review their outline and for accuracy at least once every other year. And then CEBC staff do a full lit search on each rated program also every other year. Programs can submit new papers for review and rating as soon as they're accepted for publication. And we also make program edits as we become aware of them. So if we find articles, we'll go ahead and add those as they become available.
Thanks, Pam.
So I will echo many of the processes and procedures as my colleagues described in their registries. One thing that, unlike CEBC, we accept publications whether they've been reviewed by an academic journal or not. We do an exhaustive search of the entire literature, but the training and the supervision and all that was described earlier, very consistent with what we have at Blueprints. One thing that does, in addition to all the time we've described, is for Blueprints looking at the dissemination readiness standards. So after we've gone through and vetted for our 3 standards and interventions that meet those 3 standards, it can take, we give up to a year for a purveyor to respond to us and to give us all the information we need on fidelity instruments or information on their manuals or whatnot. That can take up to a year. And if we still cannot get responses within a year's time, that's when we rate them as not dissemination ready. And currently, we don't have a formal re-review process. We list on our website every single intervention that's been certified, every single intervention that has not been certified with reasons for each. We do get questions. We do have people ask if they can, they challenge our review, and the advisory board is who makes the final decision. We actually do, though, currently have a grant from the Arnold Ventures to be looking at our model and model plus programs, many of whom have been on our registry for decades, and reviewing the literature, making sure we didn't miss any studies, and then reanalyzing the standards that were described in the articles and making decisions from there.
That sounds like some really exciting new work. Okay, we are running a little bit short on time for our panel, so I'm going to ask our panelists to keep their comments on this last slide that we have brief. But what we can see here is that each registry has different definitions of the program ratings, uses a little different language to describe the different categories of evidence. What would you recommend as far as how folks in the field should think about these different ratings? Sandra?
So our rating categories that we use for the clearinghouse were developed directly from the legislation. And the ratings are different from those of the CEBC in spite of the similar labels, and different from Blueprints, even though they also have 3 levels. So a program that's well supported under the CEBC won't necessarily have a well supported for the Prevention Services Clearinghouse or a Model Plus for Blueprints. And that can be confusing to our audiences. But I think that tells us that there's more than one way to think about evidence. And my advice is to look at all the evidence. Check out the different registries, think about what your goals are for the information, and then dig into the details about the individual studies and findings behind the program ratings in each place.
That's great advice. Either Jennifer or Pam, anything you'd like to add to that?
The only thing I would agree with that advice, Sandra, specific to Blueprints. Blueprints recognizes interventions rated as model and model plus as ready for large scale adoption. Programs rated as promising are just that, promising, and in need of further replication and long-term follow-up to assess the readiness for large scale adoption. So just so people understand the nuances between our certified interventions.
Great. Jennifer, anything from you?
Sure. Just very quickly, I think it definitely is confusing for users that there are different ratings across the different registries. We have different criteria. One thing we often say at the CEBC is that it's important to look beyond the rating. We think it's actually more important to adopt a program that best fits your needs and the needs of your population, rather than solely making the determination based on the rating level. So that's why we try to provide enough information on the CEBC about the program itself and the studies that support it, that allows agencies to determine what's the best fit for their individual needs.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you all for that great compare and contrast session across the different registries. In the last 6 minutes or so, we have some discussion items here. We've reviewed a lot of the main aspects of the 3 registries, and all of the registries rate specific programs or services. However, sometimes there are differences in programs and services across studies. For example, there may be different target populations, alterations in the number of sessions, changes in who delivers an intervention. And this means that each of the registries has to determine at what point a study is an adaptation of the original program or not. So one discussion question I have is, given the current state of the world that we're in right now, there are many studies that are currently underway that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, some have had to pivot to telehealth delivery, even though the intervention was designed for an in-person delivery. If you had a crystal ball, how do you think this period might impact the future of evidence reviews? And I will let you, each of you, just kind of take that if you have a thought you'd like to say.
I'll say quickly, I think how the pandemic has affected ongoing research really remains to be seen. And I think it's going to be an interesting and challenging time for evidence clearinghouses to try to figure out how to address those challenges as that research starts coming out.
So Blueprints, like all of us, very interested in this question. And back in May, we surveyed the developers and evaluators involved in our certified interventions, heard back from, I want to say 65%. And we were asking questions about what delivery looks like in the wake of COVID. And we got some very interesting responses, one of which being that as of May, very few had actually stopped delivery. They were continuing to deliver, and they were modifying based on limitations to not being able to meet in person. If you're interested in these responses, you can find them on our website. And we are currently talking about doing some ongoing follow-up surveys just to see how this may or may not be changing over time. One other thing I want to say is one of our advisory board members, Dr. Larry Hedges of Northwestern University, wrote a paper, a working paper funded by the Institute of Education Sciences about what is COVID doing to impact research, particularly randomized control trials. So, and how do you handle these decisions? What decisions do you need to prioritize, et cetera? That paper can also be found on our website if you're interested.
Thank you. Jennifer, anything with that to add?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate that obviously the pandemic caused a lot of our programs and providers to jump very quickly to tele-delivery methods, often in a couple of weeks. And now that we're several months in, we're getting a lot better anecdotal information about what seems to work well, what practices are less successful over tele, et cetera. But that being said, we don't really have a large body of research on most of the programs that we've rated. So it'll be interesting to see as we go forward if actual research supports that anecdotal evidence we have that these programs are effective in telemethods.
This will be a space to watch for sure. So how do we, I'm looking at the next point about registries as it relates to racial equity, another topic of national interest right now. We know that there are disparities in access to evidence-based practices across different racial and ethnic groups, and there's a question about how effective these programs are for different racial and ethnic groups. How do you see the clearinghouses fit into these national conversations?
Well, I will say that there's a great deal of diversity among the children and youth and families who participated in the hundreds of research studies that we've reviewed so far for the clearinghouse. But that's not the same thing as being able to say that a program is effective for a particular group or that a program addresses equity issues. So I think there's a lot more work to be done on these issues in the evidence community and prevention community for sure.
I think those are really important points, Sandra, consistent with where I would agree with what you're saying. Specific to Blueprints, one thing that we do on our website is if you're searching for interventions that have been certified, you can search on different criteria. You can search on the population for which the studies have been conducted on. You can search on risk and protective factors, et cetera, so that this gives the user different ways to try and identify if the intervention that they're searching for meets the target population they're interested in serving. And that at this point, we identify and list who is represented in the studies, but that's not to say that all populations are sufficiently served by the studies that have been conducted and are presented on our website.
I think that's a good point. And we're all rating programs based on the studies that have been conducted, and we report the populations that were studied, but we know that doesn't cover, racial, ethnic, minority groups, cultural groups, et cetera, fully. So I think what the registries can do is bring attention to that fact that there are populations that are being missed or not studied in sufficient numbers to really contribute to our data, and encourage funders to make sure that diverse samples are continue to be used, and make that a priority going forward in new research.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna have to conclude our presentation at this point. So I'll just highlight across registries. We hope that this presentation has highlighted for you that there are more similarities than differences. Each might have a slightly different focus, but visiting all in the course of program decision-making may be really valuable. Registries and clearinghouses play a critical role in advancing the use of evidence-based programs and services, hopefully increasing the positive outcomes for youth and children and families. All registries note that there has been some improvement in the rigor of scientific studies over time, and we can feel more confident about the results of studies and what they tell us about addressing emotional and behavioral health problems. Finally, looking into the future, we hope that registries and clearinghouses will continue to help drive improvement in the quality and reporting of studies. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. We hope that you found this interesting. There's contact information on each of our websites if you want to reach out and get more information about any of the registries that were discussed today. Thank you.